in a position where you're susceptible to mages burning you out, aggro decks just rushing you down. But Gul'dan does not do that and gives you a very powerful late game tool as well. So Pavel here, we were talking in the intro.
Ooh.
There were a lot of people who were thinking, okay, well the plan is to ban Druid, get rid of that Jade Druid. But SilentStorm's lineup is one that is trying to beat Jade Druid. I talked about how that was the reason I picked New Meta in the first place for my one to watch, and now we can see if SilentStorm can pull it off in this very first round.
It's a bold strategy, Kibler, to see if it works out for him. Banning Jade Druid is the #1 option most people go for, as Pavel has banned the Druid away from SilentStorm, even if it is aggressive. Pavel going to start things off with a card that most people online are familiar with, Jade Idol. Getting it out early on is important. Now, let's go ahead and focus on SilentStorm. We didn't talk too much about him leading up into this game here. We mentioned that he was part of the Hearthstone Global Games team for Bulgaria. We mentioned that he also made another playoff/prelim from spring 2016. But when you look at that mage deck, how do you think it actually fits into the line? Do you actually think this is a Jade Druid killer?
The mage deck feels a little out of place in terms of what his lineup's trying to do, and which also makes it interesting to me that he chose to play it in the first game here. Often, if a player has a deck that they feel like is going to struggle to get out in a matchup, they'll want to play that immediately in order to try and get their wins with it when they can, so it gets as many shots as possible. Sure. I think this may very well may be SilentStorm's worst deck against Druid, and he's led off with it. So this could possibly be a struggle for him in this match.
That's right. And what's most important is that if it is his weakest deck against Druid and Druid gets a win with it, he could be in big trouble, because that's what he really wants to target with decks like Murloc Paladin and Pirate Warrior at his disposal. Now, Pavel doesn't have a lot of that early game ramp. We're looking at Wild Growth, we're looking at Jade Blossom. These are some of the most important cards to get Druid out started. But at the same time, SilentStorm, he does have that early game. He has that Acolyte of Pain, he has this Arcane Intellect. Choosing to coin out the Acolyte of Pain and really try and get that card draw underway, so that way he can really push his opponent.
Oh, well, Pavel finds that Wild Growth. Didn't even see it appear in his hand before he cast it. That's how quick he was to the draw with that one. But yeah, the Acolyte of Pain here from SilentStorm will give him at least one card here from the Jade Golem. Allow him to chain the Arcane Intellect to really fill up his hand. But he doesn't really have the early game pressure. His deck does have both Mana Worm and Arcanologist, as well as even Medivh's Valet for minions that he can play in the early turns to get damage in against Pavel. And so far, he has actually not dealt any damage at all. Pavel's actually at 31 from the use of his hero power.
Right. Now, what's kind of important to note, too, is prior to Knights of the Frozen Throne, Jade Druid actually ended up becoming a very difficult deck to deal with if you were a burn-oriented mage, primarily because they had so much life gain. They had Feral Rage, they had Earthen Scales, and everyone knows Jades can get really big, so for 1 mana you can gain 15 life sometimes, with Auctioneer constantly cycling into the deck. Nowadays, it feels like that's not really the case because they've really taken that out. Do you feel like it's still a strong matchup against the Control Mage despite losing the armor gain?
Well, the armor gain is now still there, but it's different. Now you have the most important card is Malfurion. Malfurion the Pestilent, being able to turn your hero power into gaining 3 armor every turn, can make it very difficult for the Burn Mage to really kill you over time. You don't have the burst armor gain that you did before, but if you get Malfurion early, it can be just as powerful as having access to Feral Rages and such. But Pavel not only does not have Malfurion, but because he has only played 1 ramp card of the very many in his Jade Druid deck, is really far behind the ability to actually get there. Ooh, and now he's
going for an overdraw.
Going to try to overdraw SilentStorm, prevent him from getting some extra resources here. Overdrawing here isn't really crucial to SilentStorm's deck. He's not really a combo deck. Even if he were sort of combo oriented, he has the Alex Straws already in hand. But it does prevent him from getting value off of the Acolyte of Pain here.
Right, but in his mind, there are a couple cards that could outright win the game. You know, 2 out of the 30 cards there that he could have burned were Alex Straws and Antonidas. Either one of those would have been pretty significant hits. And now it's a little bit different. Everyone knows that Antonidas, one of the ways you can actually kill Jade Druid if you pair it with the Quest Mage, for example. In this case, though, it's just an extra source of burn and pressure if SilentStorm is able to win the board.
Yeah, and SilentStorm, though, he's really not gotten much down on the board. Pavel didn't have much ramp, but he's gotten a lot of time because of it. Because SilentStorm's hand has been card draw and removal focused, now Pavel able to play a Jade Behemoth, going to be very soon able to start playing multiple Jade cards a turn, and even the big enemy in the middle, the Ultimate Infestation, not only gaining him armor to get him out of burn range, but refilling his hand completely.
Well, it basically does everything. It
does, in
removal,
fact.
draw cards, gain life, summon minions. But we're still a couple turns away from it, though.
Kills a minion.
It kills a minion as well. Or just ends the game. That's actually another big thing to consider, too, by the way. A lot of control mages, when they're first exploring Knights of the Frozen Throne, they were largely playing, all kinds of styles, quest mage, some of them were playing Frostwitch Jaina, and they started quickly realizing that Druid actually does have a significant amount of burst from hand. Before, you didn't have to respect it nearly as much, maybe a swipe and a feral rage at best, but now with 2 ultimate infestations in hand, Druid can amount half a life, or half of your entire hit point total worth of damage with 2 ultimate infestations and a swipe.
And one of the biggest things is actually Malfurion there as well.
True.
You get the ability to have a hero power that deals 3 damage per turn, and it's very difficult for control deck to sustain against that.
Right. So it's no longer nearly just as important to freeze the board. It's equally important to make sure you count how much damage you're doing and ensure that you have the appropriate life total to play with.
Speaking of counting damage, SilentStorm took an interesting line in his turn where he just played an ice barrier rather than remove the minions that Pavel has played, looking like he's actually going for trying to just throw as much of this burn at the face as possible. That could be difficult. He's still a couple turns away from that Alexstrasza, and as you mentioned, Pavel does have ultimate infestation to get armor, which will mitigate the damage that Alexstrasza deals.
Right, and I mean, this is something that's also important too, because if SilentStorm chooses to go for that burn plan, half his hand is not really conducive to that. You have Alexstrasza, like you mentioned, but also his Antonidas would have to set up that stall for it, and he wouldn't be able to guarantee himself that extra turn unless he sets up Ice Block. So he ends up setting up Ice Block now, trying to avoid taking damage, and we'll see if he can get that enough time to stall, because right now Pavel is just going to continue to put on pressure.
And the Jade Druid's ability to continue to put pressure on like this is one of the things that does make it so powerful. Even when your opponent is mitigating a great deal of your damage with freeze effects, with barrier block, now suddenly Pavel's board is enormous, and is SilentStorm going to freeze this or ice block almost every turn for the rest of the game at this point? I mean, let's just look at the damage that Pavel has on board. It's
2 portals.
22.
It's 22 damage on the opposite end of the board. Right. How much damage does SilentStorm have? He has 2 Firelands Portal, that's 10, plus the 9 from Fireball Frostbolt, so that's 19. If he can generate a couple of Fireballs from Antonidas, that'd be 29. That still wouldn't even be able to get him over the hump because of Ultimate Infestation and the Druid hero power naturally adding armor. So if SilentStorm wants to try and piece together multiple turns to burn his opponent, that's not a viable strategy right now.
And it's interesting because we look back to the early turns of this game where SilentStorm, he coined out the Acolyte, looking to get his card draw online.
Right.
That did prevent him from having the coin later on to potentially coin Alexstrasza, to actually get his offense online before Pavel was able to overwhelm him.
True.
And it's kind of coming back to haunt him here, because if he put Alexstrasza this turn, he'd be in a very different situation.
Right. But that one extra mana crystal difference could end the game here for SilentStorm if he's not able to do anything about it. If Pavel just adds the Ultimate Infestation, this is the big card that people are talking about these days in the metagame. It does pretty much everything that you want to do. The actual good comparison is Yogg-Saron. Yogg-Saron, when you play a 10-mana card, you often want to summon around that much stats. You often want to draw cards, remove things on the board, and that's why Druids have dropped Yogg-Saron and instead played Ultimate Infestation.
SilentStorm does have a Flame Strike, which clears up most of this board. He actually picked up a Medivh's Valet, which can clear off the 6-attack Jade Golem as well. He could use his hero power to take out the 5-1 and keep the Medivh's Valet for burn for later. I think he may want some sort of board presence here.
Right, I think it's because he really plans on playing Alexstrasza next turn. So if he's going to play Alexstrasza, he needs that 2-3 for presence to not only maybe train to 5-1, but maybe even get more damage to the face if his opponent ignores his 2-3 minion. And here we go. A sight that many people are familiar with again. The Jade Idol Fandral shuffling and summoning. From this point on, SilentStorm cannot win the board at all. His entire plan is oriented on whether or not he can kill SilentStorm before he gets killed himself.
Yeah, and look at this just massive board of Jade Golems that Pavel has generated. SilentStorm does need to play the Alexstrasza. It'll do effectively 12 damage to Pavel, but he has 6 armor. And he does have the ability to continue to gain armor with his hero power, or if he does find Malfurion or another infestation as well. So Could be very difficult. All right, it's going to be Antonidas that he goes with. Trying to generate fireballs. This could leave Pavel in a situation if he actually, because he used that Wrath that turn, is in a little bit of an awkward spot.
Right, yeah. Actually, that's something that we didn't think about immediately when Pavel used that Wrath. We were focused more on the setup here from SilentStorm playing Alex Straza. But because Pavel has used a Swipe and a Wrath, he doesn't have many good options here to remove Antonidas, and he drew Malfurion in the Pestilence, the new Death Knight hero, but that's not enough to remove Antonidas. You can gain some life, though.
Yeah, it's not enough to remove Antonidas, but it does immediately gain you 5 armor and turn your hero power into 3 armor per turn.
I do have a question. Because Pavel does not have enough space onto the board, which summons first,
The first
from
one,
the Death Knight?
which I actually don't know which it is, but it's the first one. I think it's Scarab summon first, I believe.
Poisonous
the one,
Spiders or
no,
the
the 1/5s. I believe the Scarab summon first if you play
Okay.
Malfurion.
Pavel's going to look for removal options immediately, see if he can draw anything, but it doesn't look like he's hitting it right now. Oh, he's got a Spellbreaker! Wow.
Well, that definitely can shut down the threat of Antonidas here.
Yeah, that was really big, and very good to spot the fact that you can silence your own minion so you can free up its attack. Don't even leave that 5/7 body on the board here. SilentStorm only acquired 1 single fireball. And SilentStorm still is under threat of losing his ice block, and he still doesn't have to set up for any kind of burn win.
And he actually has no more freezes or ice block in his hand. So even if he did Alex Straza, he doesn't have really a way to back that up. But he's also kind of in a situation where you're losing your ice block. So your opponent also has 7 armor, and if he does have Malfurion, you know he can gain another 8 armor.
Right. Oh, man. I mean, I guess you would have to play as if he doesn't have
Yeah.
Malfurion in his hand. I'm trying to count if SilentStorm could play Alex Straza, draw Ice Block off the top of his deck, play that, and then rely on Primordial Glyph to give him another Ice Block or potentially game-ending damage, which I don't think he needs the game-ending damage because he has so much in hand. He just needs time. He's got 2 Fireballs, 2 Portals, and 2 Frostbolts. That's 28 already just from there. If he's able to weave in Hero Powers or get something else,
That's a lot of time.
he just
though.
needs time.
It's a lot of time. 2 of those cards you named are Firelance Portal, which cost 7 mana apiece. So he's going to need a exceptional amount of time to actually get those through. And as you mentioned, Pavel does have that Malfurion in his hand, so he can break the block and gain 8 armor this turn, and kill Alex Straza.
It's tough, but I mean, I've seen Mage wins from positions like this, but it's really tough if they have Malfurion. I think this is just the straw that broke the camel's back. The 5 armor is huge. The 3 armor per turn is great. People compare it to Justicar Trueheart from the Grand Tournament, where Warrior would be able to gain 4 life, the tank up that people really hated seeing if you're an aggressive player, because you knew that as soon as they tanked up once or twice, the game was over.
Even has Fandral in place, so he gets both right now. He gets
That's right.
3 damage and 3 armor. He just got Alex Straza, and now at 30.
And, important to note that interaction. If your board is too full, the Poisonous Spiders will summon first over the Scarabs.
Huh, I thought it was the Scarabs first.
So,
Shows what I know.
I was thinking maybe alphabetically, because Scarab comes before Spiders, but it doesn't really. It's just the 1/2 Poison Spiders, or the 1/5 Taunt Scarabs.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Doomsayer's too late there. SilentStorm would have loved to see the opportunity to use that earlier in the game. Primordial Glyph going to look for some way to stall.
Oh, well.
Okay. I mean,
There's
that
another way to look.
Yeah. He can get a hypothetical chain of stuff, but that's not going to do it. Simulacrum, definitely one of those cards that has nerfed passively a lot of those mage random spell generations. That's going to be game 1 to Pavel, and what a huge blow it was to SilentStorm, because as you mentioned multiple times, Caleb, at the very beginning of the series, he needs to beat Jade Druid. That's what most of his deck and lineup is oriented around.
I'm not sure that's necessarily true in this matchup. I think that broadly speaking, the deck that he's trying to beat is Jade Druid, a big part of the reason he's playing all aggro decks. In this matchup, though, I think Pavel's handlock may still struggle.
Okay, well, I mean, the handlock deck is still not really truly tested. I think a lot of people put a lot of lists out there with control handlock, and it's a little awkward to see all the results kind of piled into one deck. People don't know how to call it Control Warlock or Handlock or Demon Lock. So I do think that there is a lot of potential in it, and a lot of people have had success in tournaments with Warlock.
Yeah, I'm not saying that I don't think the Warlock deck is potentially strong, but I do think against a burn-heavy, aggro-heavy lineup, it does have the potential to just not quite have the tools on time. It is still a deck that's using its life total as a resource. And if you don't find that early Defile, in many cases you can really get run over.
Sure. Well, we're going to see what ends up happening for the rest of the series. Game 1 is in the books, but we have plenty more Hearthstone to play for this series. We had a chance to sit down with Pavel and check in with him, our reigning 2016 world champion. What's he been up to since the winter season?
Pavel is your 2016 Hearthstone world champion.
It was such an amazing feelings when I won the world championship, because I worked super hard. I want to qualify back to the world championship. It's super difficult to win world championship twice in a row, and extremely unlikely, but I think it's definitely possible. I qualified to Winter Championship and went to Bahamas and had a really nice time there. Unfortunately, I didn't qualify for the World Championship.
That is it. Duck Pond takes down the world champion.
I didn't care how much attention he got after that match. I'll have another chance in summer playoffs. This is actually my last chance. In this case, I will be the first world champion who qualified twice in a row. If I play well, then I think the chance to qualify will be about 50%. So I'll just work hard for it, and I hope it will pay out.
Prior to the 2016 World Championships where Pavel won, he was very much up there in ladder results and point standings, and for a long time he was sitting in the seat of SilentStorm and many other players, aspiring to become the champion. Now that he has, he's searching for a chance to repeat a feat that hasn't been done. In fact, we haven't had a world champion even get to the World Championships the following year yet. Firebat was not able to, Osaka was not able to, despite trying. Can Pavel be the first?
He could be. I mean, we saw at the beginning of this year just how strong his run was, with not only a win just a couple weeks after Worlds, but winning the playoffs in the winter season. So it sounds like he is definitely someone who is hungry for that repeat performance.
All right, the deck to focus on here for this series. Handlock, a deck that we haven't really seen since 2015 back in the Patron Warrior and mid-range Druid era. Handlock was that third deck triumvirate that people would always play to try and wall out a lot of those Grim Patients and Frothy Berserkers, be able to pressure the Druids. And ever since they lost the use of Antique Healbot has largely been gravitated towards either Reno Jackson Warlocks or Zoo as the main decks for the class. However, the Handlock has made a resurgence in Knights of the Frozen deck.
It has, and it's a pretty powerful deck that I think does struggle specifically against Jade Druid. I've actually played a decent amount of Handlock, and it does have a lot of problems winning those long games, in large part thanks to getting punched in the face by Malfurion repeatedly. But it does have some powerful tools. We see Pavel with the pair of Mountain Giants in his hand. That's why he chose not to just play one of his 1-drops turn 1. His plan is to life tap this turn and play a 1-drop this turn to ensure that he has those discounted Giants. But here he's facing down a pretty aggressive draw from SilentStorm. This is what SilentStorm was looking for last game, the Mana Worm into Arcanologist draw. That really puts on a lot of pressure quickly, and that could be a problem for Pavel if he doesn't get some good removal early.
Right. And I like that you mentioned that, keeping the missions of Mixtures, realizing that he gets no value from it immediately by playing on turn 1 versus turn 3. Still very much the same mana usage for Mountain Giant, but gets the 4 extra heal, assuming it dies and doesn't get silenced. SilentStorm's just drawing a ton of cards, though. This is another big difference between the Mage game, the previous game, and this game, where last game he got the card draw, but he didn't hit anything substantial. This time, he's hitting some big players. He's got Firelands Portal, he's got Archimedes Antonitis, so he's got a lot of late game burn coming up, so that if Pavel falls too far behind in the health total, it won't matter what the board state looks like if SilentStorm can just kill him.
Yeah, that's where the Warlock deck can struggle, is that it doesn't have that many ways to really restore its life total. And SilentStorm is actually just going to goes straight to face with the Archaeologist, valuing the 2 damage versus the possibility of preserving his Mana Worm here.
Yeah.
And does allow Pavel to Mortal Coil the Mana Worm and drop a Mountain Giant.
Yeah, a little greedy there from SilentStorm, but I like it because he recognizes how he wins the matchup, which is pressuring the life total. However, we've seen people really not respect the Warlock's mid-game power. I mean, for lack of a better comparison, I think the Handlock is a ramp deck sometimes. It just uses the early game tap to really power its mid-game, and you're going to be hit with big minion after big minion starting from turn 4.
Yeah, we see that Pavel has a follow-up with another Mountain Giant. He has a Twilight Drake in his hand as well. And yeah, SilentStorm recognizes, okay, I can't let this happen. I need to stop this big minion parade here. And he's going to freeze the Mountain Giant and drop a Doomsayer. We see, yeah, a number of the key cards in the Demon Handlock deck from Pavel there. The Earthring Farseer, one of the cards that he can use to preserve his life total. We see 1 in his hand, and now this Mr. Mixtures, he's just going to drop it to gain some life. He needs to get a card out of his hand. He has 10 cards in hand, so Mrs. Mixture's mostly there in this deck because it does restore life to you.
Right, and the term Handlock, of course, is because we've tried to fill our hand with as much cards from the hero power of life tap in order to have very powerful minions like Twilight Drake and Mountain Giant. However, I don't feel like those 3 cards represent the true demon aspect of it. You have Despicable Dreadlord, one of my favorite cards in the set too. Very strong to just deal with enemy opponents. And look at Pavel too, tossing in that Tainted Zealot to try to keep his hand count high. He values getting that extra card over that spell damage.
Yeah, so he wanted to life tap there to find specific cards in his deck. Like he doesn't have, for instance, a Siphon Soul. So if a big minion came down from SilentStorm, he wouldn't necessarily have an answer to that immediately. So he decides he effectively is going to pay 2 life to cycle, to get rid of one of his cards to find a new one. And
that's right.
The Abyssal Enforcer takes out the 2 3 health minions that SilentStorm plays very conveniently. And also conveniently has 6 health, so Fireland's Portal is not enough to take it down.
And, you know, the big key of this matchup is how much pressure can either player mount in the early game, which it looks like it's not really going to go one way or the other. It's been seesawing back and forth. So in the second phase becomes, can you just win by killing your opponent? SilentStorm's Fireland's porting the face. He's trying to get all that damage in, and Pavel has Blood Reaver Gul'dan. Does he have enough time to get there?
Right. SilentStorm recognizing, okay, I may have lost the board now. You know, we're getting to the stage where Pavel's going to start playing gigantic minions, and he's on a clock. He needs to kill Pavel before Blood Reaver Gul'dan comes online, and he knows that. He doesn't know that Pavel had it as in his hand, but if Pavel does get to 10 mana, all of a sudden gains 5 armor, generates a huge board, and turns his hero power into something that gains him health back, that's something SilentStorm cannot race. So he needs to win before that point.
It's scary too, because SilentStorm, I mean, he saw Pavel pretty much keep his entire hand. He had 2 Mountain Giants, you know, a Farseer. It's like, and a Mistress of Mixtures. It's really hard to just feel like, wow, did he just keep maybe the Blood Reaver Gul'dan at the beginning thing? I need to kill him faster because I know that he has cards that he values since the very beginning of the game. Of course, Pavel played the Giant and the Farseer, so now we know that's not the case. But SilentStorm could have been thinking that while making that play.
And now SilentStorm has to think about, okay, how am I going to use my resources in the next couple turns to try to end the game before a Blood Reaver can come down? He is going to Blizzard and Doomsayer here. This, hopefully, in his mind, prevents Pavel from actually preserving his board, but a Siphon Soul picked up over the top. Right. That card is in Pavel's hand right now because he played the Life Tap and the Tainted Zealot. He got 1 card deeper into his deck. Granted, he was able to life tap this turn. If it was 1 card deeper anyway, he would have found it. But that's the implication of that kind of play. Right. You make yourself more likely to draw specific cards by getting rid of cards you know aren't going to be impactful.
So many people love this deck. It's because the very early seeds that you sow with how you fight for the board, how you life tap, how you manage your resources, does have such late game implications to keeping these big minions alive. And, you know, there's also that dynamic, too. Pavel was weighing, is it worth using the Siphon Soul now on the Doomsayer versus I know turn 9 Alexstrasza, but he recognizes if my opponent plays Alexstrasza, I can pressure him with my minions on the board. Really good push back and forth with this deck in this game so far.
Yeah, this is a poor glyph for SilentStorm, though. He's really looking for damage and did not find it. Arcane Explosion can clear up the board a little bit, give his Mana Worm a little bit of a buff, but does not get him any closer to actually killing Pavel.
Right. It's one of the questions that a lot of Hearthstone players have started asking about a year and a half ago, 2 years from now. When they get put in this position, you ask, well, how do I win? You know, I have Antonitis and I have ability to generate fireballs, but that itself is not even enough. And my opponent's just putting on more and more pressure. Look, Pavel's just pushing all this damage, and even if SilentStorm is able to get himself into position to lethal Pavel the next turn. Blood Reaver Gul'dan can give that 5 armor and gain 3 life every single turn, guaranteed.
Yeah, SilentStorm here, he's got kind of this is one of the things we talk about with this sort of freeze deck, how it didn't really feel like it necessarily fit his really more aggressive lineup. If he's trying to punish decks like Jade Druid, if he's trying to punish decks like this slower controlling Warlock deck, well, he has cards like Ice Barrier. He's not playing the aggressive Secret Mage style of deck, which really could put your opponent on the back foot much more quickly, and as a result, he's in this spot.
Well, one of the awkward things, again, is because Pavel used his hard removal. How does he actually deal with this turn, the Antonidas, while setting himself up for success? He has Hellfire, Coils, Defile, and the Farseer, so I think he has to budget his resources accordingly just to make sure that he doesn't die, because he knows he's in a good spot. His opponent has used Antonidas as a Hail Mary at this point, so if you can survive this, you should be good to go, especially with Blood Reaver Gul'dan in the hand.
Yeah, this definitely the freeze with Antonidas does open a window where Pavel maybe has to kill this turn. It's actually kind of interesting. He could theoretically just play Blood Reaver Gul'dan this turn.
Leave the Antonidas.
And leave the Antonidas alive. It would allow SilentStorm to generate multiple fireballs, potentially throw at his face. But he'd go to 25 immediately. You assume your opponent gets Fireball next turn.
Right.
You probably can't do it. I'm trying to math it out exactly. Your opponent would get 24 damage over 4 fireballs at least.
That's too much, I think.
Yeah, I don't think you can do
much.
that. All right, so yeah, he's going to go ahead and this is one of the really cool things about Defile. It does put you in a situation where you can create all sorts of weird ways to kill things.
Yep.
But now, because he needed to play that Hellfire, Pavel's only at 14. And there's Fireball, Firelance Portal. He's 1 damage off lethal this turn.
Man. That is scary, because 1 Fireball was guaranteed from the Antonidas. If your opponent had Fireball plus Frostbolt, that would have been it, or Medivh Valet. It was very scary for Pavel, but that's the risk he needs to take, because from this point onwards, that could be the turning point. 1 damage off, but not going to be enough.
Well, it's not enough to kill him right now, but Blood Reaver Gul'dan only gives 5 armor, and Firelance Portal plus Ping is 6 damage.
Oh, you're right.
So,
You're absolutely right. He set it up perfectly, so that way, even if Pavel plays the Gul'dan, that's not going to be enough life. And SilentStorm is able to find the 2-turn path. Wow, really good game here from SilentStorm to be able to stay calm under pressure, recognizing that things were not looking good, but that 1 damage made all the difference, and the series is tied up.
Yeah, that was a really interesting game from both players. How we saw things maneuvering back and forth. Pavel, interestingly, if we think back now, if he hadn't life tapped that turn, the 2 life may have kept him alive. So that all this sort of game of inches, maybe it got him close enough to the card that won him the game, but maybe the 2 damage was ultimately what ends up costing him the game. And if we just look back and replay things exactly, those 2 life cost him the game.
Right, and then there's also that really important juncture. Should he have used Siphon Soul immediately onto the Doomsayer versus saving it because he knows there's a possibility of big threats, given that he would have to damage himself to do it because he could play the longer game too. A lot of interesting questions that go back and forth to that match. And again, something that you've pointed out too. At first we were focusing on Jade Druid and how he didn't ban it, but now this handlock has dropped the game to it. Still a lot of chances for this handlock to get wins, but according to the win percentages, it's just going to be a harder and harder path. Pirate Wars is a deck that's very strong, so we'll see if Pavel can weather the storm and bring it back into his series. As we take a look around all of the taverns here on the Europe continent, we have a lot of locations, a lot of matches happening. We have Casey versus Tice. That's a match to watch out for. Fabelli versus Loyan. Lots more action. We'll be back with more Hearthstone Championship Tour action right after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the Hearthstone Championship Tour Europe Summer Playoffs. Current score is 1-1. Pavel and SilentStorm are tied apiece after some of the more interesting decks have already been played. We saw this hybrid Burn Mage from SilentStorm coming out here against Pavel's Handlock deck, and the Mage was able to get over that final hump there, which he had pretty much a one-turn window to execute with his hand.
Yeah, that game was as close as it gets. SilentStorm had Pavel down to just 1 life and needed exactly the amount of damage that he had, the Firelance Portal plus ping, to finish the game after Pavel deployed Bloodreaver Gul'dan. But as we mentioned, that Warlock deck from Pavel may have a rough road for the rest of the series.
Yeah, I mean, at least on paper, it's unfavored against every one of the decks against SilentStorm. But some of them that it's unfavored against only slight. So we'll go ahead and put that on ice while Pavel turns to what is considered to be the number 2 deck and class. Now, Kevin, I want you to go down memory lane here. Has there ever been a time where Priest has been number 2 class or better in Hearthstone history?
In my heart, yes. But
outside of your personal stream, has Priest ever been number 2 or higher?
In terms of representation at Championship, absolutely not. Championship or playoff, Priest has never been this popular, and it has never been this powerful, really. The Kazakus Priest is in an interesting spot, specifically in this tournament, because of the ban available for players, which means that they can get rid of Jade Druid, which is one of the reasons that this deck is not all over the ladder. Jade Druid really is a very powerful deck that the Kazakus Priest deck can struggle with. But against many other sort of mid-range controlling decks, it really just dominates them throughout the game. Aggressive decks are where it can also tend to struggle, and that's what he's up against now in SilentStorm's Pirate Warrior.
At that opening hand. SilentStorm has pretty much everything that he needs outside of a Bloodsail Cultist to just outright win the game if Pavel doesn't deal with this early game pressure. He does have a Gluttonous Ooze in his deck, and that could crumble the entire strategy, but Pavel's not playing anything until turn 3. That's a lot of time for this Pirate Warrior to set up.
One of the things that makes the versions of the Kazakus Priest deck that people are playing right now relatively powerful, even in some of these faster matchups, is the fact they just play a bunch of cheap spells because they combo so well with so many other cards in the deck. Not only the Shadow Reaper Anduin, but also Priest of the Feast, also Lyra. You can play cards like Holy Smite, Pint-Sized Potion, Potion of Madness. Even Silence is getting play in a lot of these decks, just as a cheap facilitator that also gives you a lot of utility in certain matchups. But Pavel has sort of a mid-rangey draw here, and that's exactly the kind of draw that Pirate Warrior can really punish.
Well, SilentStorm thinking about what's the best way to deal with this, because he does have the Frothing Berserker that he just drew, so he's wondering how big does he want to go early onto the board here, and what kind of removals does my opponent have? Choosing instead to play it slow with just the Fiery War Axe, because he's got a lot more options by keeping his coin right now. Bloodsail Raider plus the upgrade is really powerful, plus he has the option of coining out Core Currently, or even just playing Frothing Berserker, so I like his flexibility at this point.
I'll take up an Acolyte of Pain, another one of the cards that helps you sort of churn through your deck to find the key elements of the Highlander Priest, so-called because there can be only one.
That's right, that's right. That's what we do end up calling it here. Now, Spellbreaker originally, I was like, wow, that's really good against Acolytes, but still kind of messes up everything from SilentStorm. So I like being able to keep the weapon and being able to put on as much pressure as possible. Pavel starting to sweat a little bit, but this is where Kazakus really kicks in. You may have forgotten him from the Mishutsu Gaiden, but Kazakus is still one of the best options to have against aggressive decks. And because Pavel just drew Gluttonous Ooze, if he can get the potion to clear the board and the Ooze can finish the weapon, that might be Pavel's ticket out of here.
All right, well, we saw, it looked like there's the AoE, Fell Bloom, the absolute key potion result he was looking for here. And Pavel taking his time. We saw him actually immediately pick, I think, the 7 armor from the first one. And now he's trying to act here. This is Pavel on like inside the actor studio, I think, with the 4 damage tall.
The extra scenes. The problem is that you snap pick to try to mess with your opponents, except now he actually got what he was bluffing. So he's not even bluffing anymore. He went to the next level.
You gotta stay in character, Pavel, you know?
That's right, we're out here just playing checkers, and Pavel is 4th dimensional Hearthstone chess.
The Bloodsail Cultist is a pretty good draw here for SilentStorm, if only because it's a play that gives him something that actually survives the potion, the additional charge from the weapon. I would not be surprised to see SilentStorm just send everything to face in respect for the possible potion. Yeah, everything to face, sort of, because he actually gets more damage by attacking in there.
Yeah, very heads-up play here from SilentStorm, recognizing the threat of area of effect cards, so trying to maximize his damage, while also removing just in case. So he's doing a hedge bet. That's not going to be enough, though, because Kazaki's Potion gaining 7 life is also a really big factor. A lot of times you can clear the board, but Pirate Warrior can just go face a lot with the weapon damage. SilentStorm has a good reload. He has the Bloodsail Raider and the Frothed Berserker. That's still a lot of damage when you put a 7-3 and a 2-4 that grows to infinite damage.
He does, but he can't play. Actually, well, yeah, he can get enough of it down this turn, and Pavel actually doesn't have a removal right away. He may be thinking, okay, I want to get the damage from Corcoran Raider in, but you can obviously get that any time. He's also afraid, I think, of the threat of a Dragonfire Potion. Does he want to commit everything into his opponent's 6 mana turn? But I think SilentStorm is at the point where Pavel has enough life, and there's the threat of so many different cards, even if it's not Dragonfire Potion, that you kind of need to just get in there and actually get the job done. Because if you put yourself in a position that you're trying to beat Dragonfire Potion, there's so many non-Dragonfire Potion cards that can beat you instead.
Oh yeah, you're talking about like Potion Madness, Shadow Word Pain, Shadow Word Death. There's a lot of things that can just instantly set you up. I mean, the Gluttonous that we talked about is in the hand as well. So SilentStorm, he has to kind of weigh what's his best options here. Is he going to swing with the weapon? He's thinking about it, and he does end up going for it, and that's a huge amount of damage that SilentStorm does. If he didn't, that swing would have been enormous.
Yes, it would have. Prophet Velen picked up for Pavel. That's a card that's included in his deck mostly because of the power it has after your Shadow Reaper Anduin to just end the game extremely quickly.
We're just silencing off, taking the guaranteed damage off as opposed to the Frothed Berserker, even though that has more potential threat. Here's one of the big cards that Pirate Warrior has been unanimously including in all of their decks, the Bitter-Tide Hydra. That kind of pressure that you're able to put onto Jade Druids largely helps you accelerate the board presence to win the game before they can ramp up their big Jades. So much so that Jade Druids started playing Big Game Hunter in their deck so they can match the Bitter-Tide Hydras. And that's a large reason why. Plus, also, Big Game Hunter won the Jade Druid mirrors.
Turns out the Hydra is actually pretty powerful here, too. Ooh, Pint-Sized Potion picked up.
Hold on.
That's really good. Priest of the Feast, Pint-Sized Potion actually allows him to clear off the Hydra.
Yeah, he can do some cool trickery here. He can Potion of Madness and then use Pint-Sized Potion and then do some other crazy stuff and heal for even more after he trades it in.
Let's see. It's not the Pint-Sized Potion? Okay.
I mean, just to gain health, but choose to heal instead. I didn't realize he only had 2 mana left.
Well, he could have. No, he couldn't quite keep his 5/5 right. So yeah, Pint-Sized Potion would have just been gain an additional life.
Yes, I thought he could do that plus heal, but he doesn't need that. And SilentStorm is now stuck in that awkward position of, I have to remove this Priest of the Feast because it's basically gaining life indefinitely.
Your magic
and it's also a 3/6 minion removing minions.
Yeah, Priest of the Feast is incredibly powerful in these matchups, and it does get the Spellbreaker hit, which I don't think Pavel really has much in the way of taunts in his deck, which is usually what you use Spellbreaker for in these matchups.
Sure. Oh, interesting. Shadow Visions. Maybe Pavel could pick up anything really useful. Picks up Holy Nova as his way to heal just in case he needs to. And also, the Lyra gave him a Shadow Word Death, so in case another Bitter-Tide Hydra comes out, he's good.
And Pavel is just getting progressively more and more out of range here. SilentStorm recognizes, all right, well, this is it. I am going in here. You have a Lyra, you get to play all the spells you want with the Lyra. I cannot spend mana to kill it because, rather resources to kill it at all. What's that?
It's a Holy Smite.
Holy Smite, okay. And that plus the Holy Nova will generate a whole lot of board clear as well as additional life and cards, thanks to the Lyra.
Does SilentStorm have a Leroy in his deck? I'm trying to think of the potential ways he can get out here.
He does have Leroy. But Leroy's still not going to be enough this turn. He's one off, even if he finds Leroy.
So he needs to find a huge source of damage like Arcanite Reaper. Bitter-Tide Hydra is normally a great draw in top deck scenarios and you need to get damage out, but we know that the Shadow Word Death exists, and also Shadow Reaper Anduin exists as well. Not to mention that there's a significant amount of pressure on board that Pirate Warrior might just die too, because you know about all the big explosion potential from Priest these days.
So many choices.
Yeah, usually you're like, okay, I have a lot of time, but now the time that you can actually have, I mean, there's Prophet Velen Mind Blast in Pavel's hand right now.
That's right.
If SilentStorm doesn't armor up, it's
10
lethal.
damage. Is there any way that he can navigate around this? I think SilentStorm need to draw a weapon here, but I'm kind of going through all the different plays that he can have, all 3 of them, and I think all of them lead to a defeat here. All right, he's going to rely on the Beer-Tide Hydra as his form of getting through the minion because he recognizes it's just dead on board.
Yeah, but this is not going to work out for SilentStorm as Pavel has any number of ways to deal with this.
Yes.
He could even just Shadow Reaper Anduin right now, getting the 5 armor, killing the Hydra, going face.
But then he loses his health restoration, which I don't know if it really
I don't know that
matters
he needs
at that
it.
point.
he just played a Velen here, so that's going to be it. SilentStorm picks up a heroic strike, but that does not do the 11 damage he needs here. And looks like Pavel is going to take a 2-1 lead in the series.
Yeah, people are saying that Priest is the second class that is the strongest in this format. And so much so that people are saying that they're building lineups assuming that Priest just gets a win. People are trying to counter the Priest. And it's so versatile and robust that people feel like they can't even reliably corner it, even if they try to target with their lineup.
It is very difficult to target in part because of what we saw in this game, just Kazakus. Kazakus is such a powerful card against the aggressive decks in terms of giving you access to early game board clear, the armor gain. You know, we saw Pavel get clear your board, gain 7 armor. That game, if it weren't for that Kazakus potion, would have been very different.
Absolutely, and specifically the way the potion lined up too, that 7 life mattering too, and being able to follow it up too with really strong plays like being able to have Priest with the Feast, or even just having minion presence on board, getting Lyra to have Shadow Word Death into his hand. So a lot of things end up lining up, but it all started from being able to stabilize with the Kazakus potion.
I mean, I even joked, you know, that the heroic strike didn't do 11 damage. Well, if it did 4 and he had 7 less life,
Right.
it would have been enough.
Exactly.
So, he needed every part of the buffalo from that Kazakus potion that game.
So there you go, a 2-1 lead for Pavel. Now the last deck is that Handlock deck, a Warlock deck that hasn't seen very good results across the board because of Druid. But when you ban Druid away, does that Handlock deck become significantly stronger? Some stats actually do say that. We looked at the China Summer Championships that are currently going on, actually, simultaneously. They did have their qualifiers earlier in the weeks. The second highest win rate deck behind Jade Druid was Handlock at 60% a clip, and it had significant amount of games, like 30, 40 games.
And I think part of that is the popularity of the Highlander Priest. I think that the Handlock deck is actually quite strong against the Highlander Priest deck. It does, I think, tend to struggle a bit against some of these more aggressive decks. You know, we saw it. It seemed like Pavel had that game against the Mage deck. You know, he had everything he needed in a lot of the spots, but just he didn't have quite enough life. He, in fact, had 1 life too few for Blood River Gul'dan to end up ultimately saving him in that spot.
Yeah, I do want to kind of qualify a lot of those statistics as well. For one thing, they had the same problem that we're talking about. They didn't know actually how to quantify what counts as a handlock versus a control
Absolutely.
warlock versus just a mid-range demon lock. There's a lot of weird deck lists that have sometimes the 6 to 8 card difference, and that's a huge variation. So they kind of pooled it all as one. The second is, I think the priests haven't truly adapted yet. Some of them weren't playing the fast cycle Prophet Valen versions to give them that burst. I think when you put Prophet Valen and all that cheap cycle in, it has the edge for sure against the handlock.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, the handlock, I think, needs to be aggressive with the minions that are difficult for the priest to deal with, things like Twilight Drake, though there are even mass dispels in some versions of the priest deck.
So,
to help
what a
take out-
time to be alive. Mass Dispel, Prophet Valen, used unironically along with almost every other card in the priest's arsenal. Yes, Purify Silence is still a real deck, and we might see it sometime in this playoffs. Let's see if Pavel's Warlock can finish the job where SilentStorm finish what he started. He was looking at this Warlock deck from the very beginning, not with that opening hand, though. The only good redeeming factor is that South Sea Captain. Pavel has a lot of time to get to his mid-game here.
And Pavel's opening hand from what we saw during the Mulligan was very, very good. You know, we saw the Voidwalker he played on turn 1. I believe the Mistress of Mixtures and a Defile as well.
Yes.
While SilentStorm's hand is a little bit more awkward.
Well, SilentStorm picked up that Nazas first mate. Without that, that could have been lights out here if Pavel was able to get that big of a board. And another big MVP card is Defile too. You know, when that Defile is able to clear off a big board of 3 minions, that's also a big backbreaker. One of the coolest cards of the expansion that many people were in love with the moment they saw it.
Yeah, Defile is super cool. We also saw in the last game, even outside of the early game multiple small minions, it allowed Pavel to set up that removal for Archmage Antonidas.
Yeah.
That many players probably looking at that like, he can't kill that. It's like, no, you just got to do this and do this and do this.
He counted for the first defile to not trigger, but the second one to trigger, and then activate the Hellfire, which allowed him the Mortal Coil draw. A lot of cool small sequencing there. Ends up being very valuable. And here's another thing too, of the way Defile works with spell damage. You see that's Tainted Zealot in hand. The way it works is the Tainted Zealot does 5 damage because it takes 2 triggers to kill itself, and then the 5th to actually do the damage once it triggers itself, once it kills itself.
And we see Pavel recognizing he has Tainted Zealot plus the Defile in hand, chooses not to play Mistress of Mixtures.
Right.
So he wants to, he knows that he has the board clear next turn.
Right.
So he enables SilentStorm to develop even more, not get any sort of trade into the Mistress of Mixtures. And yeah, there it is. So Tainted Zealot, 2 damage Defile trigger first, kills itself with the second Defile trigger.
It's so pretty, Kibler. And Pavel knew that SilentStorm could play around that. If he played Mistress of Mixtures, like you said, he trades the patches in.
Right.
How does he actually kill anything the first time Defile activates? So very good planning here from Pavel, and that was the kind of stuff that people were foreseeing with a card like Defile when it was first revealed, and that's why people love it. Is that enough, though? Look at how much the mid-game has shaped up here for SilentStorm because he was able to draw his Zoss first mate into that Bloodsail Cultist.
Yeah, now this is a lot of damage. We see a lot more waiting in SilentStorm's hand. Pavel down to just 11 life. As cool that Defile was, it may not be enough.
Oh man, this is looking really bad here now for Pavel. And the handlock decks have largely gravitated away from all those taunt givers. Before we used to look at handlock through the lens of Sunfear Protector and Defender of Argus. They don't have that anymore. Oh boy, is that just it?
That is just it, yeah.
That is
Heroic
just
strike,
it.
heroic strike.
And this is why Pirate Warrior, when I wrote it down the spreadsheet for matchups, this was Handlock's worst matchup by a significant margin. 7-3 favorite for Pirate Warrior at least, and that's not even playing tech lineup decisions for specific matchups. So SilentStorm easily cruises to a Game 4 victory, sending up to a rubber match for this first game of the playoffs.
Yeah, and now this is probably of the decks in SilentStorm's lineup. I believe this is probably the best matchup for Pavel's deck here. It's the Paladin deck. This is a deck that does not have very much burst from hand, and we saw that yes, with Defile, with Mistress of Mixtures, Hellfire, lots of early removal, that Pavel can clear the board. The problem is when you just get burn thrown at your face, you get weapons swung at your face after that point. And that's going to make this matchup, I think, a lot closer than the ones we saw. Well, not closer to the Mage one, but on paper at least, a lot closer to the other ones we saw.
It's true. The Warlock deck really excels at clearing the board and winning the board, but often at the cost of their health.
Right.
And the Paladin deck does have a couple of options with weapons, for example. We look at Rallying Blade and whatnot. But really, they have to have a board first in order to do that damage. And we haven't really seen too much Murloc Paladin at the very beginning of the series. In fact, this is the first game we'll see all tournament long. But that's another big deck that people are talking about. They thought Murloc Paladin was the deck to play because it would kill Jade Druid in the beginning. Since then, I think people have scaled back a little bit of their expectations. So where do you think Murloc Paladin fits in the current meta for tournaments?
In tournaments, I think it's a little bit different because, as you mentioned, lots of people are planning on banning Jade Druid, which is a big part of the reason we see, say, the Evolved Shaman more represented than either Pirate Warrior or the Murloc Paladin. We do see a number of players even playing Hungry Crabs in their decks, though, so they clearly think that the Murloc Paladin is a force to be reckoned with in this event. So this is a very important game for both these players. Going to game number 5. Round number 1 here. We mentioned this is Swiss. Neither player is out of it if they lose, but they have a tougher road to climb with 1 fewer loss to give to the rest of the Swiss rounds.
Right. It's very mentally taxing when you lose the first match, or first series rather. Very much like how you climb ladders. Like, oh, instead of gaining a star, I lost a star. And now you have to start thinking about all that time lost. Got to move past it, but focus on the present as well. Game 5 is what it comes down to. Who's going to take the first match here? And Pavel kept 3 of his 4 opening cards because he knew he recognized the usefulness of things like the Mortal Coil against the Grimscale Chums and also the Ooze against the weapons. But SilentStorm has a couple of interesting tech decisions from the normal Murloc Paladins. What are the first things that stick out to you, Kibler?
Well, the biggest thing is just the Corpse Taker he just drew. Corpse Taker is a card that has started to see some play in Murloc Paladin decks. A number of players are actually using it this weekend. Some even playing what is it, Stormwalker? the 4/6 or 4/8 Wind Fury minion to give it Wind Fury as well. That's a card that is particularly powerful with the Wicker Flame Burn Bristle, which unfortunately for SilentStorm is in his hand, though Lifesteal not nearly as important in this matchup.
Sure.
He also has a Galactic Crawler in his deck. We see a lot of that in some of the Paladin decks this weekend as well. Recognizing Pirate Warrior will be a factor and is one of their tough matchups. Again, not a card that's going to be really important here. In fact, SilentStorm's draw for this matchup is actually quite poor. The Spike Ridge Steeds are very powerful against other minion-based decks, but when your opponent is playing a control deck and killing almost all your minions, they're a lot harder to use.
Absolutely, and Pavel with his a little unusual choice for the Warlock deck. Looks like it's doing okay in this early game. Normally when Murloc Paladin gets to a fast start, they get overwhelmed completely. Hellfire doesn't even clear a lot of the stuff if the War Leader and the Gentle Megazord come down. So Pavel feels like he's pretty confident in his Warlock deck. And we got a chance to sit down and talk with Pavel about what it's like going first as a Europe region. He likes it because he gets to do unique strategies like bringing his Warlock.
I think I like that in Europe we have first playoffs. You actually have opportunity to build a better lineup than less experienced players. In the late stage of expansion, everyone just plays the same decks, the same lineup, and it's hard to get any advantage of that.
Yeah, so Pavel just kind of talking about how, at the late stages of the game, of the metagame at least, things are a lot more figured out. But in the very early game, he loves that Europe gets to go first because they get to set the tone for the rest of the playoffs.
Well, if I remember correctly, Pavel's lineup that he played and won the Winter Playoff with was one that was actually copied by a ton of players in future playoffs, I think including Docpone, who qualified for the championship, then beat Pavel.
Yeah.
Having qualified with the lineup that Pavel brought.
Yeah, and it's a lot of irony in that exact story. I actually no one ever framed it exactly that way, and it's actually kind of funny to me. A little sad too for Pavel fans around the world, but that's true, and so that's why he enjoys specifically going first. I know a lot of other regions like, oh, we want to go first too and see if we can do it, but for now, I'm just going to sit back and let Pavel do his thing. A little bit of an awkward turn here. I love that trade that SilentStorm took to make Hellfire a lot worse, because that was what Pavel was banking on. And now SilentStorm, if he doesn't see a Hellfire come out from Pavel, could probably put Pavel on that with a read.
Yeah, Pavel's turn here, no great way to use all of his mana efficiently. He could maybe Tainted Zealot and Mortal Coil to kill the Wicker Flame Burn Bristle, but that doesn't really do very much. And now he's going to try and give the turn back to SilentStorm in an awkward way. Okay, well now I have a 4 health minion and a Divine Shielded minion. Oh, but that Rallying Blade is a huge draw for SilentStorm.
Yeah.
That will give his Corpse Taker that one additional attack to take down that Twilight Drake.
Absolutely, that's so big. Being able to have a real play. I mean, it's not necessarily just a Rallying Blade, but it's the fact that SilentStorm could fill out the rest of his mana curve by doing something, which with 2 Spike Ridge Steeds in hand, he's definitely looking for a setup into this powerful turn 6 swing. Pavel does have that Spellbreaker though. So as much as SilentStorm is setting up the best way he can do to use his Steed, Spellbreaker comes out. But then SilentStorm is even more free to use his other cards, like Bone Mare, which we mentioned, a very powerful card, or a second Steed. So things are coming up pretty well here for SilentStorm in the mid stages of the game. Can Pavel stabilize? Having the Tainted Zealot on the board does help for a couple of his other spells, though.
He does have a lot of life to work with, which is a really important thing. You know, he does have a ton of powerful tools for dealing with many of SilentStorm's biggest threats. You mentioned the Spellbreaker that can stop a Spike Ridge Steed. And he's getting to sort of the middle and later turns where he's going to be able to do more powerful things with the mana. Still pretty far from Blood Root Gul'dan,
right.
But able to leverage the cards he's drawing each turn from life tap more effectively as well.
Yeah, I mean, Pavel was setting up for this Mountain Giant, and I still don't hate it at all. Even though it kind of dies onto the board here, it does an important thing, which is force SilentStorm to trade a lot of resources into it, and it gets the Mountain Giant out of the way. The alternative is to not play Mountain Giant and probably force the life tap and play Gluttonous Ooze, but you know that you can have such a better swing on the board here by playing the Mountain Giant.
And Mountain Giant, I feel like, gets worse as the turns go on, and things like Bone Mare are potentially a threat that you need to answer minions. Because the Spike Ridge Steed here, it's relatively powerful, and we actually see SilentStorm taking the trade to ensure that he gets value from the buff rather than running the risk of just getting Spellbreaker.
Right. And normally that's kind of a bad thing, but I completely agree with you. Mountain Giant gets a lot worse, especially when they don't have Shadow Flame, they don't have Defender of Argus, they don't have Sun Fury Protector.
Just kind of sits there. Big dude.
It's just supposed to be a proactive threat, not supposed to be something reactive and defensive anymore. A little sequencing from Pavel to try and life tap afterwards, but I guess you could always say that Tainted Zealot and Mortal Core are always happening anyways, so you draw with 3 mana as opposed to 2 mana, not a big difference.
There is an opportunity for SilentStorm to play the Bone Mare here, which would give him 2 substantial threats on the board. It is always got to be a little bit awkward. You got to be thinking about the file in these middle turns, especially with the Tainted Zealot already on the board. So you got to be doing a lot of math all the time when you're playing either as or against these Control Warlock decks.
Right. Well, Hydrologist, interesting. I mean, normally Getaway Kodo is what you want to play for when you're fighting for a value battle, which is what you're clearly losing on. Warlock has access to life tap, and you're on 4.5 cards now, so Getaway Kodo helps you get that, but you don't have the direct cards that you want to get back with Getaway Kodo. So he's probably going to have to save this.
It looks like SilentStorm is really afraid of that spell damage. Going to use his Consecration to clear off the Tainted Zealot here.
Okay. That's a lot of respect. Playing Getaway Kodo immediately there. I feel like that's kind of a mixture of a bluff as well, in case it kind of forces Pavel to play awkwardly into Repentance.
Well, just going to play the Dreadlord anyway.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it was the turn for Abyssal.
Another Bone Mare.
Man, Bone Mare is just sick. So much damage and board presence.
He is large and in charge. And crucially, Pavel does not have Twisting Nether in this deck. There's no big AoE board clear. So getting multiple big minions can be a really difficult situation. But he does have the Defile into Hellfire, which will end up clearing this. Yeah, and actually with that Doomsayer pickup, he can prevent development from SilentStorm next turn as well.
That's a really nasty combo. Whew. And also, the sequencing allows him to cover Redemption as well. So that's a really nice spot there from Pavel to make sure that he can use that to his best benefit. And the Doomsayer sets him up for a really powerful setup with either a Demon, and then he can play Blood Reaver Gul'dan and win the board. And without having the board presence, things like Bone Mare and Spectre Seed get a lot worse. They have to play it defensively. They have to play a minion and then attach into it, giving an opportunity for Pavel to take proactive trade.
And this is really, I think, where we get to when SilentStorm had that slower start. SilentStorm had, the 6-cost, 7-cost cards in his opening hand, and yes, they are powerful, but if Pavel's able to answer them and just survive, just hang on, he's used a lot of his life this game, but he doesn't really have that threat of burn finishing him off. SilentStorm needs to win in the board, and Doomsayer prevents any kind of development, which means Pavel is absolutely safe going to these power turns late in the game.
Well, here you go. Pavel has all the time in the world to set up what he wants up to 9 mana. Is he going to life tap? Looks like he chooses to. Facious Shambler, an interesting pickup as well. So he has flexibility to play for tempo, or he can play for long-term value. Actually, we have to keep track of how many demons have died too. We know a Despicable Dreadlord, and we know that a Voidwalker has died. So Blood Reaver Gul'dan is pretty good, but when you can summon back an Abyssal Enforcer with that, that's when it becomes nuts.
Yeah, I think that's part of Pavel's thought process here. He's thinking, do I want to play Abyssal Enforcer and potentially just trade it off into something? If SilentStorm, for instance, hero power plus Bone Mares. I guess in that case, you don't really have an opportunity to trade it, but yeah, he's gonna hold on to it once you get the battle cry effect.
Well, he's kind of making a very weak play here. As you guys can see some of the updates here, RDU has dropped his first series, so a little unfortunate there for a Romanian hero, but we'll find out more. If you want to follow us along with the entire Swiss bracket, make sure to check out Twitter at HS Esports, as well as the Facebook link that you saw down the bottom. We'll be doing all coverage for HCT for summer playoffs here on twitch.tv/playhearthstone.
Yeah, SilentStorm trying to figure out how to best play into Pavel's potential 10-mana turn. He needs to be aware of the threat of Blood Reaver Gul'dan, wants to have a board. Okay, if Blood Reaver comes down, do I have enough pressure to make that dangerous for Pavel?
Man, Talking about your pick of the litter bin, there's really nothing going on here for SilentStorm. He sets himself perfectly for an Abyssal Enforcer, and the Noble Sacrifice won't even do much here. Pavel even picked up another Defile, so even if he didn't have Abyssal Enforcer, he'd be able to clear all this off. Assuming he sequenced it properly. But it won't even really matter here, and Pavel even gets to squeeze in a life tap. This is starting to crumble apart here for SilentStorm. He needs to get that Bone Mirror and double Spikered Steed off, but he was not able to get that Murloc package going. Now that could be the start of something. Gentle Megasaur, very strong, and because SilentStorm already has the Vilephin Inquisitor #1 up, he can hero power, play the second Vilephin Inquisitor, and get 3 Murlocs for that Gentle Megasaur.
And he's going to need some really good adapts here for that to be impactful enough to really even phase Pavel with the board state and hand he has right now.
Right, you're looking for Divine Shield, plus attacks. At this point, SilentStorm is desperate enough that he's just like, you know what, I'm just going to go for the best board possible. And being a little greedy, I like it. He has to play very resource intensive at this point, so the more I look at it play, I kind of agree. Bone Mirror is not getting any better these days.
This does make Pavel playing a Blood Reaver Gul'dan not just, generating a dominant board. He's going to very likely want to produce something. Oh, well, okay.
All right, originally I was looking at Mountain Giant Face of Shambler, but this also works too, clearing the board. They're all okay.
And this is one of the threats of just developing a board using one of your buffs. You run the risk of getting it silenced if you're not getting an immediate either attack into the face for at least some damage or trade value.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. This is very good at securing the board again and trying to limit SilentStorm's options for be able to blow him out, because they know that SilentStorm also has a couple tech cards that can really ruin him as well. So what do you do if you're SilentStorm from this position here? Oh man, just gonna dab straight up.
Poisonous. That's something.
That's huge. Allowing him to get through these big minions.
He could actually even use Spike Ridge Steed on his Inquisitor here, so he gets a trade and then still has the poisonous minion remaining.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the line he committed to by not hero powering first. Granted, it's much more mana efficient, and I guess he feels more confident because the Spellbreaker has been used. But now Blood Reaver Gul'dan gets pretty good. Oh man, really good. And SilentStorm's already looking up to the sky, trying to count down the time to see if how long he can last here, and it's not going to be very long. Pavel has a lot of removal options. He's got a big board, double Megasaur. It's not going to be enough.
Doesn't even have a Murloc in play to get advantage of the adapt, being able to attack right away. And Pavel at 20 life with that new hero power. Poisonous doesn't matter. He can just get shot down. Health. All right, he's gonna survive the bite from Gul'dan.
Maybe he's not even the highest priority bite at this point.
I'm just saying it's a possibility.
Not to mention Despicable Dreadlord.
Oh yeah.
It's like it's an effect that you don't think about all too often because we still don't see Warlock too much on ladder.
There's
but
also just Defile. Like bite plus Defile. Does that clear the entire board?
Oh yeah. Let's look at that. If you Defile does 3, 4. Yeah, it should clear off pretty much everything.
All the opponent stuff that you care about.
1, 2. Yeah, even if the Defile doesn't clear off the board immediately, you can just use the minions to clear it all up.
And look at that Defile go.
Boom. With the Mountain Giant. Perfectly sequenced, perfect mana usage. Pavel is sitting pretty, sitting back, relaxing, deep breath. And SilentStorm has a lone Hydrologist to hold off the swarm of demons and giants. Game 5 and series #1 is going to go to Pavel, and he gets off on the right foot. But there's a long journey ahead in order to conquer the summer playoffs.
Yeah, the Noble Sacrifice not going to be quite enough from that Hydrologist. Pavel, while the game is not quite over just yet, it's all over but the crying, essentially.
Yeah, that's right. And Pavel can sit pretty just because even if SilentStorm was able to pull off some kind of miracle board here at this point, he's got Siphon Souls, he's got the hero power, which is also insane.
Yeah, she just does have lethal here with the Hellfire plus hero power, so game is over.
Game's over, and that's going to do it for round 1 here for Pavel. SilentStorm's going to have to go back to the drawing board.
This is a close one, though, and we saw the aggressive lineup from SilentStorm almost able to fully punish Pavel's handlock deck, but we talked about how this one deck, the Murloc Paladin, doesn't quite have the burst from hand to really punish the health loss from the Warlock, and ultimately Pavel was able to find his way through.
Yep, crucial victories, and the handlock, wiggled through, but how long can he survive with that deck? It was looking pretty shaky.